Hi, welcome to the Roberta Reindorf Show. I'm Roberta Reindorf, your host and your interviewer. Tonight we'll be looking at immigrants and their contributions, immigrant and the American journey. So the title for tonight is Immigrant and the American Journey. With me in the studio is a lady in our great state of Minnesota. Miss Ida, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Great to have you tonight. This evening, I want us to just talk about your journey into the American dream. So why don't you just, let's begin by first doing an introduction of yourself and, just a brief introduction of who you are.
My name is Ida Njee. I came to the United States in 1983. I came as a student in the University of Wisconsin River Falls, where I studied English and French, a bilingual degree, and eventually earned my master's degree and went into my doctorate program at the University of Minnesota. I eventually found my way into human services, working as advocates for immigrant and refugee battered women, working in human services in Ramsey County with adult protection and investigations, vulnerable adult investigations. I worked as a social worker for child foster care and child care licensing. Presently, I supervise the child care licensing program in Ramsey County. I consider myself to be a human service practitioner, which means that it helps me to work with immigrants within the community on matters that concerns the human services that is needed within that community. I am also a specialist in equality and inclusion in coaching leaders that want to have that kind of an environment in their work culture where they understand the inclusion of people who are of different cultural backgrounds, personality types, abilities, sexuality, and all the different isms that we have for people who are different from one another. So I find myself working in the field of human services and practicing that.
That's a beautiful background of you. Let's also take a look at your country of birth. And let's talk about what prompted you to migrate from that particular place into the United States.
I was born in Cameroon, and I actually was born and raised there until the age of 21. Cameroon is a bilingual country, English and French. Most African countries that did experience colonialization had already some kind of an exposure to the educational systems that we sought out in the Western Hemisphere. So in studying a degree in English and French, it's obvious that my background was already in those two areas of studies. I was already interested in English, and I was already interested in French as the content of my degree. So having been born in a country that was bilingual in both of those languages, my schooling was mostly in those languages. I left Cameroon at the age of 21 and went to Nigeria, where I did some more advanced work in my background in English and French and education, because then I started being a school teacher. The sole purpose of coming to the United States was to further my education. I had applied to Berkeley in California, and I did receive an admission to Berkeley. I had a cousin that had applied to Wisconsin systems, and I had a brother that was in Wisconsin at the time. So my decision to choose Wisconsin River Falls was basically because of the fact that I wanted to be closer to family, and that I was a self-sponsored student, and I wanted to be able to afford the tuition while I was here in college.
I'd like to ask some few questions. You had mentioned in your conversation a few minutes ago, you talked about Cameroon being bilingual. And I'm wondering if you could just please, and again, you've been a teacher before. Let's do a little teaching here and educate people where, you know, Cameroon is located in Africa, where Nigeria is located in Africa, and how you were able to transition that easy, to, you know, from Cameroon to Nigeria, and why, again, the fact that it's bilingual.
The history of Cameroon goes beyond the bilingualism of English and French. The first settlers of Cameroon actually were the Germans. And after World War II, after World War I, then the French and the British took over the territories that the Germans had secured during World War I. The part of Cameroon that is British was actually under administrative supervision under Nigeria, because the British territory that was dominant in Nigeria was solely British. It wasn't bilingual in Nigeria. And Cameroon is east of Nigeria, the country right next to Nigeria as you go towards the eastern or central part of Africa. So there's that territorial area that was British, that was under Nigerian administrative care when the British were there. It almost stands alone. But then, because both of those regions were part of Germany, when the Germans had initially won those territories during First World War, Cameroon then had a choice of either being part of Nigeria or being part of Cameroon, which was now under the French.
The French
under
rule.
French rule. Under French rule.
Under French rule.
And so eventually, I think in 1959, it became part of the French and British Cameroons.
So that means you are bilingual yourself. You speak English, and then you speak, let's say, the Queen's English because of the British rule,
Yes.
and then you also speak the French.
Yes.
So, comment ça va?
Ça va très bien. Merci.
Those are the only ones that I know.
That you know, okay.
So, you know, I was actually thinking about coming from a very hot climate in Africa, Cameroon and Nigeria, and then transitioning into a more densely cold temperature in Wisconsin. And then here you are in Minnesota. I'm thinking, why didn't you make a choice to go to, you know, the southern state of United States, such as Texas or Florida? Why did you choose to stay in Wisconsin and then here in one of the coldest states, Minnesota?
Well, I'm one of those people that is not bothered by the cold.
I see.
I am totally not bothered by the cold. I actually enjoy it. I am uncomfortable driving when it's slippery and sliding. But I enjoy the cold weather. I enjoy the weather changes. I enjoy the fact that we have 4 distinct seasons in Minnesota. The heat is daunting in Africa. In fact, when I go to visit, I don't remember that it was that hot when I was growing up in Africa. And that's why I truly believe that there is global warming. The effects of global warming is affecting Africa more than it's reported in the news or documented in documentaries that is shown around the world. Because I do not recall where it was that hot, that it was that barren with birds and butterflies and all of the beautiful things that were in the tropics when I was growing up. There's no more of that now. It's just dry and hot.
And so you don't miss it, do you?
I don't miss the weather. Yeah, but I do miss being in Africa at all times. I do miss being
Absolutely.
there at all times. Um, it's a different experience. It's a much more humane experience. The typical African embraces every human being that they see.
Absolutely.
They're kind to them. They smile at them. You know, they rejoice for seeing you. Just for the reason that you are breathing,
Right.
they are happy.
Absolutely. I agree to
So
that.
so that's different.
Looking at, talking about being humane, the feeling of being humane, let's look at some of the changes that you experience living in those two climates. And so living in Africa, living in Cameroon, definitely would be different from living in Nigeria. And then completely leaving that place and now living in the United States, living in Wisconsin and living in Minnesota. What are some of the changes? Positive changes, you talked about geographical changes, social changes, educational changes. What are some changes that you have experienced that you can share with the public?
Well, the changes that I have experienced is that the world is truly getting smaller with technology. It's no longer where you can be gone away from one region of the world and be totally isolated and not know what's happening in the other regions of the world.
Absolutely.
We've gone past that right now. So we're closer than we think. Um, it's relieving to know that you could reach out and talk to your family back in Africa. There was a time when you couldn't just communicate back in Africa because
Absolutely.
there was no communication means that was that reliable. And now it's good how you can support people in Africa. When you talk about the immigrants, the dream, the American dream for the immigrant, I have a different twist about that. I mean, there was a time when the American dream meant you'll have a piece of land that was given to you as a newcomer to the United States. Most African immigrants did not have anything given to them, nothing given to them. A typical African that lives in the United States creates an American dream for somebody on the continent of Africa. The people on the continent are the ones that dream because they have somebody from Africa that works really hard to support them in Africa.
Let's expand on that one. That is catching my interest.
It's interesting how when we come to the United States, we are all kind of like really wondering how philanthropic the people are, kind and donate stuff and share stuff and so on and so forth. A typical African immigrant is a one person philanthropist, because when you come to America and you leave family behind, the guilt of what you know that you leave behind makes you not eat everything that you've got, or kind of like hoard everything that you've got. You
Absolutely.
share.
You share.
So that's why I have this thinking that we are philanthropic in our own way.
Absolutely.
We are philanthropists that help the people that are in Africa, the politics around, the support that Africans need, and who is helping Africa, who is helping the countries of Africa. That politics is never going to be resolved. So it's the individuals who come from Africa, who have an opportunity to make a difference, that are single-handedly making the difference back at home.
Absolutely.
So because they're not getting any reward for what they do, I think they are philanthropic in the way that they share and the way that they think about the betterment of other people out there. So that's, to me, that's the American dream. It doesn't happen to the one that's here in America. It happens to the ones that are back at home in Africa, on the continent.
I absolutely agree with you on that point, because You realize that when you come and you know, do what you have to do, you have to really take back what you have learned and then now share what you have learned.
That's right.
Whether it's knowledge, whether it's finances, whether it's anything that you have learned or grasped. It's now time for you now to become philanthropist.
Yes.
And begin to share with others.
Yes.
I had a lot of conversations that the dynamics of politics in there and other things, and we're going to get a little bit into that. But before we get into that, what are some similarities and some differences that you have learned, you know, on this journey, on this American journey? Traveling from Western Africa all the way to the United States. You mentioned some tremendous backgrounds that you have been a lecturer at the University of Minnesota, one of the top universities in the Twin City. You've been a lecturer there. You are working in one of the best counties. I mean, you have vast backgrounds of things you've done, and I'm very sure that time wouldn't even permit you to say all the things on your resume.
Yeah.
What are those things that right now, you know, as people are listening to us,
Yes.
that you can share that are similar to the things that you have experienced in Africa, that you see those similarities here, or even if there are differences? And what can you tell anyone who is an immigrant in the United States as they journey on the American journey?
Well, it's challenging. The truth about it is, when you come to America as an immigrant, it is challenging. I can tell people not to be discouraged.
Absolutely.
Don't be discouraged, especially with the media. The media has a way of making you feel like you're a target of their discourse. Don't be discouraged. You have an individual calling. You have an individual way that you can work at your purpose of coming.
Absolutely.
For an African to actually leave the continent to come abroad as an immigrant, there is a lot that goes into it. It is not a spur of the moment decision, because first of all, they don't have that kind of money to come to the United States and single-handedly pay for their tuition, pay for their livelihood. So they come with an intention of survival. They are determined to make a difference. They're determined to go to school.
Absolutely.
They are determined to be part of a community. They are determined to continue with their spirituality. It takes a lot. It could be daunting. I am so grateful that most Africans do find a community that they belong to while they go through the struggle. And that is a good thing for them. It is a good thing to also think of your family, your extended family. If there's any way that you could have your family around you,
Right.
it makes a difference. To have your own siblings or your own parents to be a part of this journey. This journey is not an easy journey.
Absolutely.
You talked about my teaching experience. Yes, when I was teaching at Metro State University, I taught short stories. And I can tell you, in studying American literature, there is lots of short stories that talk about the survival of the early pilgrims that came to the United States and how they struggled to survive in a new land.
Right.
There's all of the history that that we do about the Native Americans, the
Right.
challenges of fitting into
A new
this
society.
whole pluralistic society that we all enjoy now,
Right.
and how different groups have struggled to fit into the puzzle. So there is a lot of challenge, I would say, but at the same time, because it's an intentional decision and a purposeful one, most people do find a way of treading their way through the journey.
Well, talking about challenges, I think I have my struggle of the challenges too. But But let's talk about, because you way up here on the ladder, and I'm trying to get information to most immigrants and as well to educate our Americans and, you know, all the people that live in the United States so that they know the immigrant story. But I also would like you to touch a little bit on, you know, you talked about challenges. What kept you going? What is it that made you say, you know, I'm just going to keep going? Because you could have gone back. You could have gone back. Were there certain times where you felt like going back? And if not, and if yes?
My situation was different.
It was different.
My situation was different. I met my husband in college, and he is not from Cameroon.
I see.
He's not from Cameroon. He's Nigerian, and I'm Cameroonian, and we have 3 wonderful daughters who were born here in the United States. We could either go to either one of the countries, but at the same time, that would have been a selfish decision on our part. We both chose to raise the children here, and that was easy for us to decide. And because of that choice, we did not have any struggles after that. There was not a doubt in our minds that that was the choice that we had made.
Right.
So it helps to know what you really want in life. It helps to also know that the profession that you're getting into is a profession that really kind of has an American structure around it.
Right.
Sometimes people don't know that they cannot work forever. So if you are an immigrant and you have a job that pays you well and the job doesn't have any benefit for when you cannot work,
right,
it is your responsibility to plan for that time of when you cannot and will not be able to work anymore.
Right.
But there's jobs there that you could work for now that have a plan for you for when you get to the stage in life when you can work no more.
Right.
And those are the daunting experiences that immigrants might have a problem sorting those kinds of things out. So you've got to be able to sort out, what profession do I go into now, and how does that profession prepare me for when I am not able to work, if I'm going to spend the rest of my work years, work life in the United States.
Absolutely.
So, yes. And I hope that in our communities, we can have conversations around things that are that important in our lives. There's things that are much more important. We haven't been around Minnesota for too many years. I don't think that we had a large immigrant community in the last 60 years. I would put it about 50 years.
Right.
So because we've come that far, we've been here to almost half a century, it's time for difficult conversations.
Right.
It's time for conversations of end of life. It's time for conversations of retirement. It's time for conversations of, so is this the place? Is this it? It's most difficult to find an African that is in the end of life years that is still questioning where they want to be. Do I want to be back in Africa? Do I want to be in the United States? Those kinds of things.
I think that would be a very nice topic to discuss, and I can't agree with you more on that. It's about time we talk about these things.
Yes, it's difficult to talk about those things.
It's difficult because you have people that, like you said, have been here perhaps 50 years plus, and they probably might be thinking, do I go back? And where am I right now with my life? Where do I go from here? Am I, and I like when you touched on, you have to think about the career that you are, you're gonna end up with. Where are you gonna go with your life? With what kind of career? Where is it gonna end you? I think that's a conversation we need to have.
Yeah. There's lots of conversations that we need to have.
Let's switch back to when you were talking about politics. That really caught my attention. You know, being a leader, being an immigrant, being a scholar, being a lecturer, being somebody that you have, you've rose from a very low level. Let me not use the word low level, but you know, you've come up a bit.
Yeah.
And you know, with the recent election that was going on, we had the primaries, and in the primaries we saw lots of immigrants, we
Yeah.
saw lots of women, we saw people of color that were running for office. And it's not that's just few months ago. What was your thoughts like when you were sitting in front of the television and, I mean, you were looking at these immigrants that came here, some that came here as refugees, you know, and they have struggled their way through whatever means they had to, you know, and now all of a sudden have ended up with federal positions, all the way to the White House. What was your thought on that? What was your thought?
I was very proud. I was very proud that it's important to be someplace and somewhere when you have an intention to be part of a society.
Absolutely.
You've got to do it. I'll tell you a story. When I first came to the University of Minnesota when I was doing my doctoral program, I went to the students' administrative office to ask them. I wanted to know why international students were charged so much money to go to school, and if anybody had ever done any research around the level of poverty in some of these countries where the students came from. And the administrator that was there at the time, I don't remember his name, said to me that in America, they function mostly around interest groups. Interest groups kind of bargain and negotiate, you know, different things for different groups.
Right.
And when you listen to people talk about international student tuition, out-of-state student tuition, in-state student tuition, first generation, these are topics that interest groups spend time fighting for different breaks for people to have. Unless we participate fully as immigrant and refugee communities in politics, in education, in policy matters. Presently, my field of work allows me to do a lot of things around policy matters. So unless we do that, we would never have the whole picture of our being here. This is just the pieces of the puzzles that we are all observing, is that not one single person or one single group is going to take the mantle from where we are as immigrants and refugees all the way to the mountaintop. It's going to happen because we have all these small pockets of people that are putting their energy in different places and different efforts that is going to put this together. It's going to allow us in one voice to find our direction of what matters to us.
Absolutely.
Around here.
Right. So talking about finding your own being, you know, in the context of the American dream, can you elaborate on that, please?
Finding your being? Finding
your being within the American dream. And so we're looking at somebody like Oman, Mrs. Oman, you know, and how she had the courage to begin to stand for being a House representative, and her confidence behind, you know, that whole structure and that whole thing, and how she confidently kept campaigning, and the fact that other Africans, you know, such as those that were around, came together to help her because she's running for a good cause. And then get into that particular office. And there's this myth going on within certain parts of the African community where people say, well, you have an accent and you probably wouldn't be accepted, you know, and well, your accent is going to open you up where people are not going to be able to understand you. And the fact that people just sit on people's, you know, being to the extent that you have the courage, you have the criteria, you have whatever it takes to do, but you're sitting on the fence.
That's the power of community.
Absolutely.
What you're trying to get at is the power of a community. I'll tell you something. Have you heard somebody telling a story and you go, that sounds like my story?
Absolutely.
That's what happens when you see that kind of a movement. When you see a movement that attracts and support from similar people and friends of similar people and co-workers and church members and different kinds of interest groups that have been paying attention to the story, that's when you begin to understand that the voice that she brings to the table
Absolutely.
is not for herself.
Yes.
It's for a story that speaks for many people, that speaks for many immigrants. And that is why it is so powerful. It's so powerful because as a community of immigrants and refugees, we should never assume that somebody else knows our story.
Right.
Because they don't know our story, you will not see them carry the mantle to fight for our rights or our successes or our differences. You have to bring somebody that can tell the story and convince the community of that story and continue to tell the story.
Right.
Because you can only tell the story in pockets and smaller groups. But when you take it now to where she's at in Congress,
Right.
oh, our story has gone far from Minnesota, hasn't it?
Most definitely it has.
It has gone very far.
Definitely.
And it's about the story. It's about the story and the people that she represents and the community that believes in what she represents and the community that believes in what the people that she represents go through every day. Even if in the end her style of politics is not the most acceptable style of politics, that doesn't put any kind of a dent in the story that she's telling and that she's representing the community for which she's telling the story about.
Absolutely.
So that's the most important thing.
That's
to
the most
remember.
important thing. You did touch on policies. You touched on recently you are working on some policies in the state. We've talked a little bit about, politics, but you also mentioned a very important thing here, the word movement. You said when you see a movement, there's a movement going on. Do you see a kind of movement going on in the coming 2020 election? In the recent primaries, we saw women rising up from nowhere. I call it women empowerment. I see young women coming from New York City, women coming, and it's women of all kind of, women from all kind of class. Education, business, some coming from politics already, some even not in the political arena. And they are coming, and they are coming with a lot of power and a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge. What do you say about the coming 2020 election with the rise of women that we see proliferating around us here?
Never undermine the power of women. Never, ever undermine the power of women. I will not bet on women. Women are like the most unspoken of giants in the world.
I see.
They have a power about them that has only begun to surface. And I wouldn't be surprised if more and more women are in the 2020 political arena making a whole lot of difference, because we live in a time when I do believe that women would have been the last people to make this issue a gender issue. Women, I don't think, felt that they should make politics a gender issue.
Right.
Women have been treading on the verge of keeping politics as a family issue, like it is for everyone. But more and more, especially the 2016 election,
Yes.
because of Mrs. Clinton's situation, it became an obvious gender issue. So blatantly obvious that it gave us pause for us to think, oh, it's not only about wanting to be the president of the United States. It's about, if it's a woman, then it's different. So it became obvious that even if we took the gender issue in a very moderate, civilized manner, the rest of the electorates were not going to treat it as such. They were going to treat it as this huge thing of rivalry that almost felt like it came from a foreign entity. And yes, women then said, okay, maybe we need to have a louder voice in communicating that this is not foreign, this is the real world and the real society that we live in, where we have a voice, where we know what the issues are, where we know what's important to our families, where we know what is important to the women that have served this country for many, many years. So it wasn't something that was foreign. It wasn't something that was single-handedly left for a few women. It was something that was perceived or spoken of differently. But now I think that it's obvious that the women have welcomed and embraced this way of presenting the dialogue. If it's going to be presented as a gender issue, then yes, it's welcomed.
I think I thank you for touching on that. I couldn't agree more on this. But as you were talking, a lot of histories were popping in my mind. I started thinking about women particularly have been shut down for far so long across the world, all over the globe. You know, when did we start seeing women actually coming to the far front? You know, I think it's just recent in the 1950s where women were allowed here in the United States to even get out and vote. Because women were not considered to vote, right? And I think having been shut down for far so long and having been sidelined for far so long, it's getting to a point where women are realizing that we are the untapped reservoir around the world, and that there's so much reservoir in us, and that we need to now step out the game. Today we have people like Amy Klobuchar running for president, you know. We have Kamala Harris.
Yes,
we got
Kamala Harris from California.
From California. I actually have a friend here who is
Elizabeth
a big
Warren.
fan of Elizabeth Warren. We got a big fan. I have a big friend here who is a big fan of Kamala Harris. And we talked a little bit about Kamala Harris, and I'm thinking that I'm very hopeful. I'm very strategic on this issue. And I know we've touched a little bit on this, but let's talk about, you know, the last Grammy Award. Last year Grammy Award, we had a person that is well known around the world, Oprah Winfrey.
Yes.
Oprah Winfrey came out of the scene, you know, mount the stage, and she went this way, and I'm paraphrasing, and she said, there is a rise of women. And it suddenly changed the atmosphere in the room. Everybody became happy. Both women were happy, men were happy. And I saw the beauty and, you know, the glow of happiness in people's faces. And it was like everybody was embracing this, you know, conversation that she brought out. It was just a simple statement that there is a rise of women.
Yes.
What do you say about that?
It's
So
going,
that, I'm sorry.
it's going back to the whole thing about nobody else can tell your story.
Absolutely.
That it goes back to that, you know,
Idea.
basic principle that when you tell your own story, it makes a whole world of difference than somebody else telling your story. It almost felt like the women felt like if we don't come out in numbers, real solid numbers, and say it as loud as we can, our stories still might not be
Head.
breaking the ceiling.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yes.
we must be loud enough so that everybody recognizes that we will tell our own story. Enough of this telling our story for us.
Right.
We will tell our own story. And that's the immigrant story. The immigrant story continues to be told by others. We have never been given a platform to tell our story.
Absolutely.
And so more and more people would tell your story for you and look at immigrants and think that immigrants are here to take rather than give.
Right.
And here, somebody like me who taught as a graduate assistant at the U of M for 4 years, at Metro as a community faculty for 7, I touched a lot of American lives long before I could feel the impact of my presence in the United States.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, not to talk of the students that I was helping in River Falls in the study hall with their French. It's you cannot measure the impact of the presence of the immigrant and the immigrant story within the community.
Absolutely.
So it's all about telling our own stories. It's all about women insisting that they'll tell their story, and they have the power to tell their story, and the men don't have the audacity to be the only ones that tell our stories.
Absolutely.
There was a time when most authors of women's stories and women's lives was men, and I think we're really turning a corner where those days are gone.
Right.
Women are telling their own stories by themselves.
So then it looks like our conversation is leaving men out. Let's take a little moment and also talk about the immigrant man. The immigrant man. What do you have to tell them?
The immigrant community. We've been talking about the immigrant community. You cannot be without a community.
Absolutely.
And the community is what gives whoever is championing that community a voice. Because if you're not well informed on the lives of the members of the community, then you're not making a difference. I served on a committee for the Ramsey County immigrants, the East African immigrants in Ramsey County. We were going to do some kind of a task. It was a task force to study their needs in Ramsey County. And I had a friend that was the chair of that task force and invited me to come and be part of the initial conversation. That was when the Somali community first came. And in those days, it was hard for the Somali men to think that in discerning this whole idea of how are they going to move forward in a new society, that they needed to include the women in the conversation. because they were used to.
So that means there was a culture piece in there.
There was a cultural piece in there. They were used to the fact that the men can get together and make decisions, and the women would go with it. So it was interesting that I had served as a chair of Immigrant and Refugee Task Force for Ramsey County prior to this time. So I was invited to this, and I went there solely for the purpose of telling the men the reason why they should, in the front end, include the women. So sometimes, if we don't know what we need in our communities, we might miss out on a lot of things. Now, the reason it was important to get that conversation and start it right there about get the women in the front end is for them to start understanding a life away from home, where at home they can have some family members that can help with the children. And here, there's no such thing.
Right.
Here, your wife is going to be left alone with the children at home unless you understand what it means to use childcare, unless you understand what it means to access childcare.
Right.
So there were certain things that would affect the women directly that they needed to bring to the table in the front end so the women understood why they became a part of the community. That community that was designing how to access the kind of help that they needed as East Africans. So it's important that we know and have some strategies around how we build community. It includes everybody, the men, the women, the children. It's everybody.
Absolutely. So going back to and touch a little bit on immigrants in the White House now. The transition that took place in the recent primary election and then the coming 2020 election. So now we have a lot of immigrants, right, that are in the White House. Do you see some changes coming in this 2020? Do you think that we're going to have some new policies, right? Because you said, oh, there has been a big change. There's going to be a big change. And there has been a big change. And so with these changes that we see with Omar going to the White House and other, immigrants that have gone to the White House, do you speculate that there will be some policies that will be coming in place because of this new changes, in terms of our story being told?
Well, I know that when Lupita
right.
Nyong'o had put her gele
right.
and went to one of the,
Grammys.
I think it was the Grammys.
It was the
I think
Grammys.
it was the Grammys.
It was the Grammy. It was the recent Grammys.
It was dubbed Gele Goes to the Grammy.
Right.
Well,
the story was told.
The story was told. Now we have a senator who has hijab.
Right.
And she proudly wears her hijab.
Right.
Well, the hijab goes to Congress.
Absolutely.
And that story is told. Now, it is a part of understanding that the genie is out of the bottle.
Okay.
We're not going to be what is described by just a few communities in the United States.
Right.
We're going to be a community that has been growing and that has been affecting the changes that are now part of our reality. And there is no reason to be uncomfortable about the realism.
Right.
This is the real life. These are the real people in your neighborhood. There are little kindergartners in my grandson's kindergarten school that have the hijab. This is reality.
Absolutely.
It is absolutely insane for people to think that this is bizarre. It's not bizarre. This is who is in our communities.
Right.
I remember when we were voting for the 2016 election in Brooklyn Park, the lines were filled with immigrants,
right.
like filled with immigrants that had become United States citizens.
Absolutely.
And I know we were in the majority, and the minority Caucasian neighbors and friends were looking at everybody and thinking, where in the world did they come from?
Right.
I'm like, part of the reason that you cannot explain where they came from is because of your involvement on the continent of Africa.
Right.
When you go to wars out there, when you go to colonize different countries out there, when you're indirectly spreading some reality of yours that eventually somebody else is going to be in that reality. And why would you be surprised? Why would you be surprised that you go to Iraq and fight all these wars and the Iraqi refugees want to make America home and you're surprised? So that lack of humanity that makes some of us want to identify ourselves as human service practitioners, because somebody needs to talk about the humanity of all this mess.
Right.
You know, and that, I think that's what I do best.
We got about 8 minutes left, and I think we've touched on some great conversations. But I want you to take a minute and tell me whether that you're working on policies now. Are you thinking about an electoral office?
No.
No.
Not at all.
No, it's not your interest.
No, I'm not interested in anything remotely close to politics.
All right. So with that said, would you say that your coming to the United States has been an advantage or a disadvantage? Would you say that, well, I finally realized that I made a decision. I made the right decision. Maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, I made the right decision. And I hit the American dream. Would you say that?
I'm content with my life.
Absolutely.
I'm fully content with my choices that I made, and I'm content with the successes that I've had, and I'm content with the beautiful family that I've raised. I am fully content with the way that my life has gone. So I'm not one of, I belong to a church that has a partner church in Cameroon. So I go to Cameroon quite a bit, to the partner church. So we do a lot of mission work with this partner church of ours in Cameroon. So maybe part of my contentment is because I can physically see how my presence here in the United States affects the lives of the people that I left behind in Cameroon. But yes, I am one of those people that has no regrets, none at all.
Beautiful, Miss Ida. It's been wonderful having you. I want you to just take a minute, look in the camera, and would you please tell somebody who is an immigrant, a woman or man, child or anyone, what you personally would like to give it to them as an advice, being an immigrant, whether they are just arriving yesterday, or they just got here 2 weeks ago, or they got here months ago, or they got here years ago. What is the one particular message that you would like to tell that immigrant?
I'd like to tell any immigrants that just found themselves here that a new life has begun for them, and that new life has got to include not only them and their family, but the community around which they find themselves. Go out in your community, go to the community center, meet different people, talk to different people, ask questions. Don't be shy to ask questions about things that you thought maybe you would see here, which you haven't seen, or experience here that you haven't experienced. That's the only way that you would know if you should continue to dream about that thing. You might find out that that thing would never happen to you here in this country, so it would be nice for you to get it over with as soon as you can. but don't isolate yourself. Do not isolate yourself. And also, for the new immigrant, do not isolate your children. That is one of the worst thing that you could do to a child, is to isolate them because you want them to be something that is only imaginary in your mind. A child that is born and raised in America cannot know how you want them to be African in the country that you came from. So try not to isolate your children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Ida. It's
You're
been
welcome.
amazing having you. Thanks for your time here. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been amazing for having Miss Ida in here tonight. And with that, I would like to say good night. Thanks for watching the Roberta Reindorf Show. We'll see you here next evening, tomorrow evening. Thank you very much. And thanks for watching Roberta Reindorf Show.